husband's favorite dishes is red beans and rice. We don't make it often because it's a little stressful for me. But I happened to get some deer sausage from my in-laws, and so now we're revving up for red beans and rice. So my first step is to take 16 cups of cold water, and that's 4 quarts, 16 cups. I have 3 tablespoons of salt that I'm going to stir in and dissolve into the water, because the first thing we need to do is brine our beans. And this is just going to get them soft enough that when they cook, they'll open up. So for us, red beans and rice is one of those dishes that you have to plan for ahead of time. So the salt is almost dissolved. Now I have 2 cups of pinto beans that I'm going to put into the water. And we are going to let them stay for the next 8 hours. At least 8 hours, up to 24. After 24, you need to rinse them and put them away. But we're going to let these sit for at least 8 hours, and then we'll be back. So our beans have been soaking overnight. I've now drained them, and they're ready. I have we're going to start with 4 slices of bacon that I've already cut in half. And now I'm going to cube. Just very simply, we're breaking it up. Then we're going to leave this in our stock pot, this thing right here, on medium heat on our stove for about 5 to 8 minutes, just until it gets brown and cooked all the way through. But first, we are going to go through all of our mise en place, which is everything we need to make the entire meal, because there's a lot of cutting and chopping. Right, so when we're ready, we'll put that on the stove. In the meantime, I'm going to get a different knife and take the gloves off because I'm not dealing with raw meat anymore. So I need 1 onion, which we have, a green pepper, and a celery rib first. So my onion has been in the freezer. This is because it freezes in the juice so it doesn't release and hopefully will not make me cry. My eyes are very susceptible to onions. So, my poor husband is behind the camera chewing on his fingernails thinking I'm about to cut my whole finger off because I don't have my cutting gloves on. So, I have them on. I also got my serrated knife. There we go. Okay, so we need a minced onion. I'm thinking I might need to let the onion thaw out for a little bit. Let's work on our bell pepper. So, we're going to seed it, stem it, and then dice it. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off the top. Cut off the bottom. Make a slice down the middle. Open it up. Take your knife and follow it along the outside of all of the seeds. And then throw that part away. Because you don't want that. I'm going to remove all of the seeds so I don't get any inside our red beans and rice. And then very simply, I take a panel at a time. I chop. And then we want them diced, minced really. So we're going to cut them along in strips. And we're going to continue on with the rest of the bell pepper. Just like that, in tiny little pieces. So if you have this white part, I don't know if you saw that, this white piece that's attached in the middle, cut that off. I'm going to run my knife right along it. Cut that piece off. This one too. And then start over. So that's our green onion. I mean our green pepper, not a green onion. Now we need 1 rib of celery. Here's my celery rib. I've already rinsed it. Just run it under cold water and kind of brush the dirt away. I'm going to cut off that white end, throw it away. Cut off the top because it's a little bruised. Throw that away. I'm going to slice my celery down the middle along that middle spine to split it into 2, like that. And then cut it into tiny, tiny pieces. So, our celery is done. See how easy that was? Now we're going to try that onion again. I think I froze it for too long this time. My husband would just tell you to leave the onion out because he doesn't like it in there anyway. Can't make it through it. Ah, right. Take the outer piece of the onion and peel it away because that part never cooks right. If I can peel it away. Throw all that away. I'm just going to make small cuts along the outer edge. And then we're getting them into itty bitty pieces. I don't make the onions as small as possible. And my husband gets a bite of onion. It's all over. He won't eat any more. So he doesn't mind the flavor of onions. I think it's really just the texture. So I try to get the pieces as small as possible. And my recipe usually calls for a whole onion. I'm only going to use half of an onion this time, because the onion is kind of big. So there is your diced onion. I'm going to finish this up and then we'll get to cooking. Okay, I said we were ready for the stove. We're not. I forgot we have to do thyme. This is a sprig of thyme, T-H-Y-M-E, thyme. And all you do is start at about the top and run your fingers down all the way to the bottom, if you can, and get all those little sprigs off. And we need a teaspoon of this. This is the fresh thyme. If you are going to use dried thyme, you need about half of a teaspoon, because dried spices are much more potent than fresh. And there is our teaspoon, which is all we need. Now the last thing I have to do is cut the sausage, so we can do everything back at the stove from here on out. So I use 2 pounds. You only have to use 1. I really like sausage, especially the deer sausage that we get from my mother-in-law. So I'm using 2 pounds. I've already diced one, or cut one. I'm going to show you, I cut it on a bias, so it looks like this. So I'm using deer sausage. If you like your red beans and rice a little spicier, use andouille, which is a Cajun sausage. You can use plain regular pork sausage. We've used turkey sausage before. I just happened to get deer sausage and I like it. So our sausage is cut. Now we're going to the oven. To the stove. So I've got my 4 slices of bacon all chopped up and I've got them in the bottom of my pan. My flame is on medium. And we're just going to let this cook for about 5 to 8 minutes. I'm going to keep checking on it. But I want all of the fat to render, which means you don't see the fat anymore. It becomes a liquid. And then we're going to add our vegetables. So if you can look, most of the fat has been rendered. And we got some nice crispy pieces of bacon in the bottom. So what we're going to do now is take that fat and I'm going to let it cook my celery, that bell pepper, and that onion, or half an onion. So I'm going to stir this around, and then we're going to let it sit in the bacon fat until those vegetables get really soft, which is about 6 or 7 minutes. And then we'll be back. So it took about 6 minutes, and those vegetables are nice and soft. So now we're going to add our seasoning. I've got 1.5 teaspoons of minced garlic. I've got 1 teaspoon of paprika. I've got 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. 1 teaspoon of thyme and 2 bay leaves. We're going to stir that together. This only needs about 30 seconds, and then we're going to add our broth, our water, and our beans, and let it all soak for about an hour. So, our garlic and the rest of our spices are really fragrant. So I'm going to add 4 cups of chicken bone broth. I'm going to add 5 cups of water. And then my beans that we let soak for 24 hours. Okay. We're going to stir this together. I'm going to turn up the heat so I can bring this to a boil, and then I'm going to reduce it to a simmer and put a lid on it and let it simmer for about an hour. So if you notice, we've got a rolling boil going. So I'm going to reduce the heat to about a 2. We still want it to cook. I'm going to stir it a little. I'm going to put the lid on, and we're going to leave it alone for about an hour. So our red beans and rice have been simmering for an hour. I'm now going to add my sausage. Very, very gently so I don't splash myself with the juice. We're going to mix that together. And I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of red wine vinegar. And I'm going to stir all that in, put the lid back on, and let it cook for another 30 minutes. And while that's going on, we're going to make rice. So I'm going to make the rice for our red beans and rice in my pressure cooker. You can do this on the stove, in a rice cooker, any way you want to do it. My pressure cooker works fabulously, and I don't have to monitor it, and that makes me happy. So I have 4 cups of long grain white rice. I have 2 tablespoons of butter. And then I have 4 cups of chicken bone broth. This is important. This is 40 grams of protein in this cup. My youngest son, Elijah, loves rice, but getting him to eat meat is like pulling teeth. So if I can incorporate protein into things like rice, pasta, anything like that, muffins too, I get him to eat protein and he doesn't even realize it. So in half a cup of rice, he probably gets 5 or 6 grams of protein, which is good. So, bone broth, and then 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. This just keeps the rice from sticking together. I like to not have my rice clumped. We're going to stir that in. I'm going to Instant Pot lid on. There we go. I'm going to close the vent because it's going to pressure cook. I'm going to cook this on pressure cooking on high for, it only takes 5 minutes. I'm going to start it. When it beeps at me, that means that the rice is done cooking, but I need to let it naturally release the steam for about 10 minutes, and then I can automatically release the steam and we'll have perfect rice. So I prefer my red beans and rice to be more like gravy and less like soup. So I'm going to make a slurry to thicken it up. I have a tablespoon of cornstarch, 2 tablespoons of water. I'm going to pour that right in. And then I'm going to whisk it together, make sure that all of the cornstarch dissolves. So if I took straight cornstarch or even flour right now and added it to the hot liquid, you would get clumps of uncooked cornstarch or flour, which is why you make a slurry. So make sure that your cornstarch and water are completely dissolved. See? I'm going to pour it right in. Stir it in. Make sure it gets all the way around. And then put my lid back on and let it cook for the next 10 minutes, and then we should have my nice thick red beans and rice. So our rice has been cooking for 5 minutes. It's been cooling and letting out steam slowly for about 13 minutes. So now I'm just going to vent it and let it finish getting rid of all that steam that has accumulated. And now we'll open it up and look at our rice. So now that the steam is gone, pop the top. And there you have perfectly cooked rice. So it took 20 minutes and a second slurry to get the thickness that I like on the red beans and rice. Or the red beans, really. So now the last step is we're going to pick out the bay leaves, because those don't taste good when you bite into them. And now we're ready to serve. So to plate it up, I have my bowl of rice. I'm going to take a ladle and I strain off some of the juice, but I like to keep some of it to flavor the rice. Otherwise you get a bunch of rice that has no flavor to it at all. And there we have it. Red beans and rice. I would also normally garnish this with some scallions to give it some color. But my family doesn't eat onions unless they're way cooked in tiny pieces. So if you're having a dinner party, chop up some scallions into cute little pieces and you can put them on top.